Dusty winds blow through the camp, now home to thousands who escaped Fallujah.
On November 8, 2004, American Marines and soldiers moved into Fallujah under artillery fire, airstrikes, and the glow of burning buildings, entering a city that had become the strongest symbol of the Iraq War's failure to end when Washington said the invasion was over. 18 months earlier, Saddam Hussein's regime had collapsed so quickly that the world saw statues pulled down, government buildings abandoned, and American leaders speaking as if the hard part of the war had already been finished. But by the time the Second Battle for Fallujah began, Iraq had changed into something darker and far more dangerous. The army that had once served Saddam had been disbanded. Thousands of former officials and soldiers had been pushed out of the new Iraq. Insurgent attacks had spread across the Sunni heartland. Abu Ghraib had poisoned America's image, and Fallujah had become a city where occupation, revenge, politics, and resistance all collided in the streets. What followed was the most brutal urban battle of the Iraq War, and one of the clearest moments when the world realized that the war had not ended with Saddam's fall. It had only entered its next phase. In the spring of 2003, the invasion of Iraq looked, from the outside, like a stunning military victory. Coalition forces had crossed the border in March, driven north through desert and cities, defeated Iraqi units that either collapsed or melted away, and entered Baghdad in less than a month. Saddam's statues came down. His government disappeared. His palaces were occupied. The old regime that had ruled Iraq through fear, war, prisons, informers, executions, and party loyalty seemed to have vanished with astonishing speed. On May 1st, President George W. Bush stood aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln beneath a banner that read, "Mission Accomplished," and announced that major combat operations in Iraq had ended. The words were technically careful, but the image was not. To many watching, it looked like a victory speech. Yet the hardest part of the war was beginning at the very moment the United States was trying to declare the first part finished. Iraq was not a defeated army waiting to be peacefully rebuilt. It was a country whose government had collapsed, whose police had vanished from many streets, whose ministries had been looted, whose infrastructure was damaged, and whose population had wildly different expectations of what the American occupation would bring. Some Iraqis were relieved to see Saddam gone. Others were suspicious from the start. Many waited to see whether the new power in the country could restore order, electricity, water, jobs, and dignity. Instead, the first months after the invasion brought confusion, shortages, humiliation, and a growing feeling that no one truly controlled what was happening. The occupation government created by the United States was called the Coalition Provisional Authority, and its most important early decisions shaped everything that followed. Paul Bremer, who became the head of the CPA, moved to purge Saddam's Ba'ath Party from Iraqi public life and dissolve the military and security institutions of the old state. To supporters, this was necessary because Saddam's regime had been built through the party, the army, and the security services, and the new Iraq could not be built on the same structure. To critics, it was a disaster because it threw huge numbers of experienced officials, officers, soldiers, and administrators out of work, many of them Sunni Arabs who already feared that the new order would be controlled by their enemies. In one stroke, men who had once carried status, pay, weapons, and authority found themselves unemployed in a country full of anger and explosives. Many had joined the Ba'ath Party because membership was necessary for advancement, not because they were loyal ideologues. Many soldiers had served the state because that was their profession. Now they were told there was no army left for them, no salary waiting, and no clear place in the future the occupation claimed to be building. The decision did not create every part of the insurgency, but it helped create a pool of men with military training, local knowledge, resentment, and very little to lose. Through the summer and fall of 2003, the violence grew. At first, Many attacks were scattered and opportunistic, carried out by loose groups using weapons and ammunition left behind after the regime collapsed. Improvised explosive devices began appearing on roads, striking American convoys that were not prepared for a war where every pile of trash, parked car, or broken curb might hide a bomb. Former soldiers, religious militants, criminals, local fighters, and foreign jihadists all entered the widening conflict for different reasons. Some fought because they wanted the Americans out. Some fought for money. Some fought because they feared the rise of Shia power. Some fought because chaos itself had become an opportunity. The United States struggled to understand what kind of war it was now fighting. The army that had conquered Iraq had been built to defeat another army, not to police every neighborhood, rebuild a state, and defeat a shadowy insurgency that could attack and disappear among civilians. American units improvised. Some tried negotiation and local relationships. Others relied on raids, arrests, checkpoints, sweeps, airstrikes, and overwhelming firepower. Every mistake mattered because a single killing at a checkpoint, a disrespectful search, or a house raid that humiliated a family could turn a local grievance into another reason to fight. The occupation had become a war over perception as much as territory. Fallujah was one of the places where that war hardened fastest. The city sat west of Baghdad in Anbar province, inside the Sunni Triangle, where opposition to the occupation was already growing. Fallujah was conservative, proud, tribal, religious, and deeply tied to the networks of Saddam's old state. Many former officers and Baathists had roots there, and many residents saw the Americans not as liberators, but as foreign soldiers occupying Iraqi streets. Tensions had already been high in 2003 after shootings involving American troops and Iraqi civilians. By early 2004, Fallujah had become a place where American authority was weak. Insurgents were organizing openly, and every incident threatened to ignite something larger. On March 31, 2004, that explosion came. 4 American contractors working for Blackwater were ambushed and killed in Fallujah. Their bodies were burned, dragged through the streets, and displayed from a bridge over the Euphrates. Images of the mutilated bodies spread across the world and caused outrage in the United States. For Americans, the scene recalled the brutality of failed interventions and demanded an answer. For military commanders on the ground, it presented a terrible problem. If the United States did nothing, Fallujah would look untouchable. If it responded too quickly and too harshly, the city could become a symbol that pulled more Iraqis into the insurgency. The decision was made to attack. In April 2004, Marines moved into Fallujah in what became the first battle for the city. The operation was meant to punish the killers, break insurgent control, and restore American authority. But Fallujah was not an empty battlefield. Civilians remained inside, and insurgents fought from homes, streets, mosques, alleys, and hidden positions. American firepower was enormous, but every destroyed building and every report of civilian deaths became part of the political battle outside the city. Al Jazeera and other media showed images of suffering. Iraqi officials protested. American allies became uneasy. Even newly formed Iraqi forces were reluctant or unwilling to fight their way into the city beside the Marines. The assault was halted before the Marines could fully take Fallujah. American officials tried to present the pause as a local solution, turning security over to an Iraqi force that was supposed to stabilize the city. In reality, the result was messy and damaging. Insurgents claimed they had survived the American attack. Fallujah became a symbol of resistance. Many Marines believed they had been stopped just as they were gaining momentum. The United States had gone in to restore credibility, but the incomplete battle made Fallujah even more powerful in the imagination of the insurgency. Then came Abu Ghraib. At the end of April 2004, the world saw photographs of American soldiers abusing Iraqi detainees at Abu Ghraib prison. Prisoners were hooded stripped, threatened with dogs, forced into humiliating positions, and photographed by their guards. The scandal spread across the Middle East and beyond, destroying much of the moral language the United States had used to defend the occupation. It gave insurgents a recruiting tool, turned suspicion into rage, and made even some Iraqis who hated Saddam look at the occupation with disgust. Fallujah and Abu Ghraib became linked in the same terrible spring, one showing the violence of the battlefield, the other showing the humiliation of captivity. At the same time, the south of Iraq was also burning. Muqtada al-Sadr, a young Shia cleric with deep support among poor Shia communities, led a movement that rejected the occupation and drew strength from anger, religion, family legacy, and frustration with the new political order. His Mahdi army rose against coalition forces in Baghdad and several southern cities in April 2004, forcing the United States and its allies to fight on more than one front. The occupation was now facing Sunni insurgents in places like Fallujah and Shia militants in cities like Najaf and Sadr City. The idea that Iraq was moving smoothly towards stability had become impossible to believe. By late 2004, Fallujah was once again outside meaningful government control. The Iraqi force left behind after the first battle had collapsed or been absorbed into the city's armed networks. Foreign jihadists, including men linked to Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, had gained influence there alongside Iraqi insurgents. Kidnappings, executions, bomb-making, and attacks were tied to the city. For American commanders, Fallujah had become more than a local problem. It was a challenge to the entire future of the occupation. Elections were planned for January 2005, and the United States did not want a major insurgent stronghold operating so close to Baghdad, while the new Iraqi political order was being presented as legitimate. This time, the United States prepared carefully. Marines, soldiers, special operations forces, aircraft, tanks, artillery, engineers, and Iraqi troops were assembled for a second assault. A berm was built around the city. Civilians were urged to leave, and many did, carrying what they could before the fighting returned. Others stayed because they were too poor, too old, too sick, too afraid, or too tied to their homes to leave easily. Fallujah was becoming a battlefield before the first major assault began, but it was still a city with families, memories, mosques, schools, shops, and streets that had not been built to become fighting positions. Insurgents prepared for the attack by planting explosives, blocking roads, fortifying houses, and creating paths through walls so they could move from building to building without exposing themselves outside. The second battle opened in early November. American and Iraqi forces first seized the hospital, partly to control a place where casualty reports from the first battle had shaped public opinion. Then the main assault came from the north. Artillery and airstrikes hit the city. Tanks and armored vehicles pushed forward. Engineers cleared obstacles. Marines and soldiers entered neighborhoods street by street and building by building. The operation was called Phantom Fury by the Americans and Al-Fajr, or the Dawn, by the Iraqi government. The names sounded clean. The battle was not. Urban warfare strips away the distance that modern armies often prefer. In Fallujah, the fighting happened room to room, stairway to stairway, rooftop to rooftop, and sometimes from one side of a wall to the other. Insurgents waited in houses rigged with explosives, fired from hidden holes, used mosques and homes as positions, and sometimes allowed American units to pass before attacking from behind. Doorways could be booby-trapped, streets could be covered by snipers. A house that looked empty could become a killing space the moment a squad stepped inside. The Marines and soldiers answered with rifles, grenades, machine guns, tanks, bulldozers, and airstrikes, because in that kind of fight, survival often depended on overwhelming whatever was in front of them before it killed them first. The city was torn apart as the battle moved south. Buildings were smashed by tank fire, artillery, and bombs. Walls collapsed into streets already filled with rubble. Fires burned through neighborhoods. Dogs moved through abandoned areas. Bodies lay in houses, alleys, and courtyards. The civilians who remained lived through a nightmare of noise, fear, hunger, and uncertainty, trapped between insurgents who would not surrender and a military force determined to take the city. Fallujah had become the kind of battlefield that left no clean line between victory and destruction. For the American troops inside the city, the fight became one of the hardest of the war. Units cleared buildings, only to find insurgents reappearing behind them. Men kicked down doors, knowing the next room might contain a fighter with an assault rifle or a bomb wired to explode. Casualties mounted in the first days, and the pace of the advance depended on small groups of Marines and soldiers making decisions in seconds under conditions that no map could fully explain. Fallujah turned the Iraq War into something immediate and personal, a city of concrete rooms, narrow streets, smoke, fear, and enemy fighters close enough to hear. By mid-November, organized resistance had been broken in much of the city, but the battle did not end cleanly. Pockets of insurgents kept fighting. Searches continued. Explosives remained hidden. Bodies had to be recovered. Buildings had to be checked and checked again. American commanders could say the city had been taken, and militarily, they were right. The insurgents had lost their strongest urban sanctuary in Iraq. Many fighters had been killed. Weapons caches were found. The Iraqi government and the United States had shown they could retake a city by force. But the victory came at a heavy cost. Nearly 100 American troops were killed in the battle, and hundreds more were wounded. Iraqi forces also suffered losses. Insurgent deaths were far higher, though exact numbers remain difficult to know. Civilians died as well, and much of Fallujah was left damaged or destroyed. The city that had been taken back was no longer the same place. Streets had been cleared, but the reasons Fallujah mattered had not disappeared. The anger that fed the insurgency was not buried under the rubble. In some places, the rubble made it deeper. For the families who returned, victory did not look like the end of a battle on a military map. It looked like neighborhoods broken open, homes marked by bullets or flattened entirely, and streets that had to be searched before they could be lived in again. Many people came back to a city where the old markers of daily life had been destroyed or made unfamiliar. A school, a mosque, a shop, or a family house could now be remembered as a fighting position, a place where someone died or a place no one wanted to enter. Fallujah had been retaken, but it had also been changed into a symbol that different people would remember in completely different ways. That was the problem at the heart of Fallujah. The United States could win the battle and still not end the insurgency. Many fighters had fled before the assault or moved elsewhere. Violence continued across Iraq. Sectarian tensions grew. Al-Qaeda in Iraq and other extremist groups kept working to turn the conflict into a Sunni-Shia civil war. The January 2005 elections went forward, but many Sunnis boycotted them, deepening the political divide. Fallujah had shown that American forces could clear a city with devastating power, yet it also showed that no city could be bombed, raided, and rebuilt into legitimacy by force alone. The most brutal urban battle of the Iraq War mattered because it revealed what the war had become. It was no longer a campaign to remove Saddam Hussein. That part had been finished quickly. It was now a struggle over occupation, identity, revenge, sectarian fear, foreign fighters, militias, broken institutions, and the question of who had the right to rule Iraq after the old state was gone. Fallujah became the place where those forces met in their most violent form. It was not just a battle on a map. It was the war's hidden reality made visible. In the years after Fallujah, the Iraq War continued to deepen. Sectarian killings increased. Militias grew stronger. Al-Qaeda in Iraq helped drive the country towards civil war. American strategy would change again and again as commanders tried to contain a conflict that had already escaped the shape imagined in 2003. But Fallujah remained one of the defining images of the war. Marines moving through shattered streets, insurgents fighting from ruined houses, civilians displaced from their homes, and a city forced to carry the weight of decisions made long before the first assault began. The battle proved that Saddam's fall had not answered the question of Iraq's future. It had opened it by disbanding institutions, underestimating the insurgency, mishandling the occupation, and then trying to restore control through firepower. The United States found itself fighting for cities it had already claimed to have liberated. Fallujah was where the promise of a quick war collided with the reality of a broken country. It was where mission accomplished became street-by-street combat, where occupation became insurgency, and where one city showed the world that Iraq was nowhere near over. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe for more history content covering wars, revolutions, and events that shaped the modern world.